What would you do if your family laughed and mocked when your adopted child called you and your wife mom and dad? Right there at my grandpa's farm party last year, in front of everyone at Thanksgiving dinner, my family said my adopted daughter wasn't blood, didn't deserve to carry the family name. My parents did exactly that. Right in front of my 7-year-old daughter. A kid who'd been abused for half her short little life. And that's when everything inside me exploded. I don't forgive them. I'll never forgive them. But what I didn't expect was what my grandpa did right after that. He made my parents pay a price they never could have imagined. Before I get into the details of this story, thanks for choosing to listen to my family's rocky adoption journey today. Hello everyone, I'm Garrett, 34, and I work as an architect in Denver, Colorado. I've been married to Delaney, a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital Colorado, for 7 years. And this is the story about how my family almost fell apart because of a 7-year-old kid on Thanksgiving last year. The day was supposed to bring everyone together to be grateful for what we have. But my family's different. They turned it into the day I lost faith in the very people who brought me into this world. Delaney and I had been trying to have kids for 4 years of countless tests, hormone shots, and 2 miscarriages. After the second one, I found Delaney sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., crying silently. In that moment, I felt utterly useless, like our bodies were betraying the dream we'd been holding on to since our wedding day. Delaney was the first one to bring up adoption. First, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew how my dad would react. He always cared about bloodlines. I still remember it as clear as day when he told me right after I got married, his voice cold as ice. You need to have your own kids. That's what a real family is. Taking in someone else's kid who knows what genes they've got. But after the second miscarriage, I didn't care what Dad thought anymore. We started the adoption process and decided to keep it secret from the family. I know it was a coward's decision, but I needed time before facing the storm I knew for sure was coming. A week before Thanksgiving, I called my grandpa, Warren. He's the only person in the family I trust entirely. After I told him everything, he was quiet for a few seconds, then said, his voice warm but firm, "Bring the little girl here. I want to meet my new great-granddaughter. Don't worry, I'll be there." The night before we left, I was reading to Meadow when she suddenly looked up at me and asked, "Dad, where are we going this weekend?" That was the first time Meadow called me Dad. My heart just stopped. 6 months of waiting, 6 months of trying to build trust with this little girl, and a straightforward word wiped away all the exhaustion. But right after that, she looked down and asked, her voice shaking, "Will they like me?" I hugged her tight and said, "I'll always be here for you, no matter what happens." Thanksgiving morning, we drove to Grandpa's farm on the outskirts of Fort Collins. It was the first time my family would meet Meadow, except for Grandpa, who was the only one who knew beforehand. And it was also the first time I really understood what it means to protect your child. The drive from Denver to Fort Collins took about 2 hours on I-25. Delaney sat in the passenger seat, turning around now and then to check on Meadow in the back. She was hugging Clover tight, her white stuffed bunny, humming some song under her breath. Delaney turned to me and whispered, "What's she singing?" I listened for a moment, then chuckled softly. "I think it's that cereal commercial from TV." While we were still smiling, Meadow suddenly stopped singing and called out toward the front. "Mom, does great-grandpa really have horses?" Delaney turned back to look at her and nodded. "He sure does, sweetie. Great-grandpa has 3 horses." The moment I looked at her in the rearview mirror, memories of the first night I met Meadow came flooding back like slow-motion footage. 14 months earlier, Delaney called me at 11 p.m., her voice shaking. "Garrett, can you come to the hospital? I need you, because of a child." I drove to Children's Hospital Colorado, my heart pounding. Delaney was standing outside the ER, eyes red and puffy. She pulled me to a corner of the hallway and told me about a little girl who'd just been brought in. Meadow, 6 years old, broken arm, bruises all over her body in different stages of healing. Neighbors called the police after hearing disturbing sounds from the apartment next door for months. The kid's birth parents had substance abuse problems. But what broke Delaney wasn't what she saw. She looked at me, tears welling up, and continued. I asked her if it hurt. She shook her head and answered in this flat voice, "I'm used to it." A 6-year-old shouldn't be used to pain. shouldn't look at the world with empty eyes, as she'd already lost all hope. That night, Delaney squeezed my hand tight and said, "Garrett, I can't let her go back into the system. I just can't." 8 months later, Meadow officially became our daughter. The day we brought her home, Delaney gave Meadow a white stuffed bunny. She hugged it to her chest, looking at us with suspicious eyes like she was waiting for someone to snatch it away. Meadow named the bunny Clover and hasn't left it behind since. It was the first thing she truly owned. Meadow's voice from the back seat pulled me back to reality. "Dad, can I ride the horses?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror and smiled. "I'll ask Great-Grandpa." The car turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm. Grandpa's 2-story log house appeared in the middle of the field, smoke rising from the chimney. My parents' blue Ford F-150, Boyd and Corinne Hollister, was already parked in front. Delaney looked at me and asked, tension in her voice, "You ready?" I took a deep breath. "No. But we can't keep hiding forever." Grandpa Warren was already waiting on the porch. He smiled when he saw us getting out of the car. But that smile faded when my parents stepped out from the front door. They stood frozen when they saw Meadow hiding behind Delaney's legs, clutching Clover tight. My mom spoke first, her voice tight as a wire. "Garrett? Who is this?" I took an intense breath. "Mom, Dad, this is Meadow, mine and Delaney's daughter. We adopted her." Silence. The kind of heavy silence that comes before a storm. Dad didn't say a word. He just looked at Meadow, then at me with eyes as cold as a Colorado winter. Grandpa was the one who broke the silence. He walked down the porch steps, got down on one knee at Meadow's eye level and said to her, his voice warm, "Hey there, granddaughter. I'm your great-grandpa. I've got some horses out back. Want to go see them?" Meadow shyly nodded, her eyes lighting up even though she was still hiding behind Delaney. My dad finally opened his mouth, his voice ice-cold. "Let's go inside. We'll talk later." My sister Tatum ran out from inside the house. She looked at Meadow, then at me, confusion clear on her face, but still managed to force a smile and said to Meadow, "Hey sweetie, come inside and play with Rosie." Before I walked into the house, Grandpa put his hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You did the right thing. I'm here." Dinner started at 6. For the 3 hours of waiting, Dad didn't say one word to me. He just sat in the living room, drinking whiskey and staring out the window, jaw clenched tight. I knew the storm was building. Thanksgiving dinner at Grandpa's farm was a tradition since I was little. The long oak dining table was set beautifully, as it was every year. Golden brown turkey sat in the center, surrounded by mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, cornbread, and stuffing made from Grandma's old recipe. But this year, the atmosphere was heavier than ever. 8 people sat around the table. Grandpa sat at the east end, facing my dad. Meadow sat between Delaney and me, quietly eating, eyes down on her plate. She was curled up, shoulders slightly hunched, the instinct of a child who'd been hurt before making her sense the tension even though she didn't understand why. In the middle of that suffocating atmosphere, Rosie, the 3-year-old sitting across from us, suddenly leaned over the table and asked Meadow, her voice crystal clear, "Do you want to play dolls with Rosie after dinner?" Meadow looked up, shyly nodded, and smiled. That was her first smile since setting foot in this house. But that warm moment didn't last. My dad sat at the head of the table, silently cutting turkey, not looking at anyone. Mom tried to lighten the mood by asking Tatum about her teaching job. Tatum gave a few polite responses, but everyone knew it was just a way to buy time. Finally, Dad put his knife down with a harsh clatter. The whole table went silent. He looked straight at me and spoke, his voice sharp as a razor. "So you hid this from the whole family for 6 months. When Dad said that, I put my fork down. Dad, I was going to tell everyone, but before I could finish, Dad cut me off. For what? To prepare me for a shock? Congratulations. You succeeded." I took a deep breath, looked Dad straight in the eye. "This is my family, Dad. Delaney and I have the right to decide. We don't need anyone's permission to have a child." When I said that, Dad leaned forward, eyes blazing. "The right to decide. I raised you for 34 years so you could bring home some random kid and call that your right to decide?" Seeing things getting tense, Mom quickly put her hand on Dad's arm. Boyd, maybe we should talk about this after dinner. But Dad jerked his arm away. No. I've been quiet for 3 hours. I want to talk now. Then he glanced at Meadow, who was shrinking next to Delaney, and lowered his voice, but still loud enough for the whole table to hear. Blood is still blood, Garrett. Someone else's kid, who knows what genes she's got. Her parents had problems. Who knows if she inherited it? Hearing that, I clenched my fist under the table. You're talking about my daughter. I won't let you talk about Meadow like that. Right then, Grandpa Warren slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the glasses shake. He looked straight at my dad, his voice warning. Boyd, stop it. Dad whipped around to Grandpa. Don't get involved. This is between Garrett and me. Meadow hunched her shoulders, clutching Delaney's shirt. I put my hand on her back, trying to give her some comfort even though I was boiling inside. The whole table fell into tense silence. My brother-in-law, Sterling, kept his head down, staring at his plate, not daring to speak up. Tatum picked up Rosie and covered the little girl's ears. And then, in the middle of that heavy silence, Meadow spoke up. Just one simple sentence. An innocent question from a 7-year-old. But it was the final straw. Meadow tugged gently on my sleeve, her blue eyes looking up at me full of confusion. She asked me, her voice barely a whisper, Dad, what's blood? The whole table went dead silent. I could hear the wall clock ticking in the living room and my own heartbeat. Then my dad burst out laughing. A dry, cold laugh that echoed across the dinner table like ice cracking. He shook his head, looking at Meadow, then at me with undisguised mockery. But what made my heart feel like someone was squeezing it was when my mom covered her mouth and laughed along. Dad's laugh was painful enough, but Mom's laugh hurt 100 times worse. She was the person I thought would take my side, or at least stay quiet. But no, she laughed, right in front of my daughter. After a few seconds, Dad stopped laughing and looked straight at Meadow's face. He leaned toward her and said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, What's blood? Let me explain it to you. Blood is something you don't have. Blood is the Hollister family bloodline running through our veins. And you're just some kid your dad picked up from somewhere. Meadow froze, her blue eyes wide open, not understanding everything, but instinct telling her these weren't kind words. Her lips started trembling. Hearing that, the blood in my body felt like it was boiling. I shot up from my chair, the chair scraping against the wooden floor, and said through gritted teeth, Dad, stop it, right now, before I say things we'll both regret. Dad looked at me without backing down one bit. He stood up too, both hands planted on the table, looking straight into my eyes. You threatening me? You threatening me over some kid who's not your blood? Don't you remember what happened with Colton? Garrett? Hearing that name, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Colton. The name I'd been trying to bury for the past 2 years. Colton was the child Delaney and I adopted before Meadow, an 8-year-old boy who'd been through 4 foster families before us. Looking back now, that should have been a warning sign. But at the time, we just thought he needed a family that would love him long enough. At first, Colton was well-behaved and polite, but after 2 weeks, everything changed. He started having uncontrollable fits of rage, breaking things, and screaming in the middle of the night. We took him to see a therapist, but things didn't get better. One night, Colton set the living room curtains on fire. Delaney caught it and put out the fire, but she sustained second-degree burns on her hands. We still kept trying, still believed love could change everything. Until last week. I came home from work and found Delaney sitting in the corner of the kitchen, blood soaking through her shirt sleeve. Colton had attacked her with a knife. 7 stitches. The long scar on my wife's arm is still there to this day. We had to return Colton to the system. It was the most painful decision of my life. Delaney cried for a whole week, and I carried the guilt like an invisible scar. Somehow, my dad found out about this. He called me and said, his voice full of triumph, I told you so. Taking in someone else's kid, who knows what kind of person they are. Now your wife's scarred for life. Happy now? Those words burned through me, and that's why I kept Meadow a secret. I didn't want to hear those words again. I didn't want her to endure his judgmental stares. But that day, at the Thanksgiving table, I realized I was wrong. I should have faced Dad from the beginning, instead of letting my daughter hear these words. Dad continued, his voice like a hammer. Colton was sweet like this at first too, Garrett. Then he almost burned down your house. He made your wife get 7 stitches. Now you brought home another one? What did you learn from last time? In that moment, Meadow curled up, her shoulders shaking. She didn't understand what they were saying, but the survival instinct of a child who'd been hurt before told her these words were about her, and they weren't good. She clutched Clover to her chest like a life preserver in the ocean. Seeing our daughter like that, Delaney pulled her chair closer and held Meadow tight. She looked straight at my dad, eyes blazing, and spoke up, her voice controlled, but I could hear the anger in every word. Meadow isn't Colton. Colton had serious behavioral problems before he came to us. Meadow is a victim. She was abused by the very people who should have protected her for 3 years. Dad just shrugged indifferently after hearing that. Still, the child of people with problems. Who knows what she'll turn out like? I gritted my teeth, trying to control my boiling anger. Meadow isn't Colton, Dad, and you don't have the right to talk about my daughter like that. Hearing me argue back, Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the plates clatter. He pointed at my face and yelled, "Your daughter? Is your blood running through her veins? She's not your child, Garrett. She's just some kid you picked up from society's trash heap." As soon as he finished, the whole room seemed to freeze. My mom's mouth fell open, her hand shaking as she brought it to her chest. Tatum clutched Rosie tight, her eyes wide with horror. Sterling jumped up and then sat back down, not knowing what to do, and Delaney, my wife, held Meadow tighter, her eyes blazing but her lips trembling as she tried to hold back. And me? I felt blood rushing to my head, my ears ringing, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Everything in front of me seemed to blur in the rage. I wanted to flip the table. I tried to grab Dad by the collar and scream in his face. I wanted to do anything to make him stop talking. But then I heard a tiny sob next to me. Meadow started crying. Not the loud crying of normal kids, but silent tears streaming down her cheeks, shoulders shaking in waves, but not a single sob. This child was too used to crying in silence because if she screamed, she'd get punished. Seeing her like that, the anger inside me suddenly turned into heartbreaking pain. I couldn't lose control in front of Meadow. She'd already witnessed too much violence in her life. But before I could react any further, Dad said something I'll never forget. Something that even now, whenever I think about it, I still want to punch a wall. Right after that, Dad pointed straight at Meadow. His finger aimed at her like pointing at an intruder, someone unwelcome in the very house where I grew up. He looked straight at her face and declared, his voice cold as ice, "This little girl is not my granddaughter. I refuse to accept her into the Hollister family." Hearing Dad say that, Grandpa Warren shot up from his chair, put both hands on the table and said in a warning voice, "Boyd, stop it right now. This is not how we treat a child." But Dad waved him off and turned to respond, "Don't get involved in my business. This is my family. I have the right to decide who gets in and who doesn't." Seeing things escalating, Tatum also stood up and tried to stop Dad. "Dad, please don't say any more. Look at that little girl. Can't you see she's scared?" Hearing my sister, Dad whipped around and yelled at her, "Sit down. This is none of your business." Tatum flinched and stepped back, tears welling up in her eyes. Sterling quickly pulled his wife down, his eyes looking down at his plate, not daring to speak up. Then Dad turned back to me, glancing down at Meadow curled up in Delaney's arms. He lowered his voice, but every word was still sharp as a knife. "I don't care how many papers you signed. I don't care what court made the ruling. To me, she's not family." Meadow cried. Her shoulders shook in waves, hands clutching Clover to her chest so tight her knuckles went white. But still not a single sob escaped. In the middle of that suffocating atmosphere, Rosie looked around, confused, then turned to tug on Tatum's sleeve and asked her mom, voice crystal clear, "Mom, why is Grandpa yelling at Meadow? Did she do something wrong?" That innocent question hit the room like a slap in the face. Tatum held her daughter close, her eyes red and puffy, lips moving but not knowing how to answer. Grandpa Warren tried to intervene once more. He walked toward my dad, put his hand on his shoulder. "Boyd, listen to me. Can we go outside and talk privately? Don't do this in front of the kids." Hearing Grandpa, Dad shook his hand off. "If you want to talk, Wait until I'm done. Witnessing Dad treat Grandpa like that, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked straight into Dad's eyes and said, my voice shaking with anger, but every word clear. Meadow is my daughter. She carries the Hollister name. She's my family. Whatever you say doesn't change that. Then I turned to look at Mom. But maybe she wasn't on my side anymore either. I took a deep breath and continued. And if you can't accept that, then you don't need to see me anymore. Starting today. Hearing my declaration, Delaney stood up and picked up Meadow. She was still clutching Clover, face buried in Mom's shoulder. My wife looked at me. Let's go, Garrett. She doesn't need to be here anymore. I nodded and put my hand on my wife's back, ready to lead my little family out of this room, probably for the last time. As we walked toward the door, Dad yelled after us, his voice full of challenge. Go ahead. In a few months, you'll come crawling back to apologize. Mark my words. I didn't turn around. I put my hand on the doorknob, ready to step outside. I thought that was the end. I thought we'd drive back to Denver in the dark and never come back to this house again. But right then, the sound of Grandpa slamming the table echoed from behind like a warning bell, and everything stopped. Maybe my grandpa had been trying to endure all evening. He'd been holding back, trying to be the peacemaker, trying to calm my dad's rage with gentle words. But everyone has a limit, and my dad had just reached Grandpa's limit. The sound of Grandpa's hand slamming the table echoed through the room like thunder. Water glasses shook. Everyone froze like statues. In my 34 years, I'd never seen Grandpa this angry. He stood up slowly, 76 years old, with white hair, but his back was still straight and his eyes still sharp as when he wore the county sheriff's badge. He didn't look at my dad. Instead, he walked over to where Delaney and Meadow were standing near the door. He stood before his granddaughter-in-law and great-granddaughter, then gently pulled a handkerchief from his shirt pocket. He reached up to wipe the tears from Meadow's cheeks, his voice gentle as he spoke to his great-granddaughter. It's okay, sweetheart. Great-grandpa's here. No one's allowed to make you cry anymore. Meadow looked at him, her blue eyes still watery but less shaky. She nodded softly, still clutching Clover tight. Then, Grandpa turned to look at my dad. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They were deeply disappointed. The kind of disappointment a father feels when he looks at the child he raised his whole life and realizes they didn't turn out as he taught them to be. He spoke slowly, word by word. I was a cop for 35 years, Boyd. You know that. Dad started to open his mouth to say something, but Grandpa held up his hand and continued. For 35 years, I saw everything in this world. I've seen newborn babies abandoned in trash cans in the middle of winter. I've carried little kids out of houses that hell couldn't match. He paused, took a deep breath, and continued. I've looked into the eyes of children whose own birth parents oppressed, their own flesh and blood, whose bones were broken. And tonight, Grandpa's voice caught for a second. He looked straight into my dad's eyes and said, every word like a nail being hammered. Tonight, I had to watch my own son, the child I raised, taught, hoped would become a decent man, treat a 7-year-old child worse than the criminals I used to handcuff. Hearing Grandpa say that, my dad jumped up and argued back. You're overreacting. This is my family business. You're old, rest, don't interfere anymore. Grandpa nodded slowly, his eyes unwavering as he replied, you're right. I'm old. Maybe this is my last Thanksgiving, who knows? He paused for a beat, then continued, but you got one thing right. This is family business. And I'm still the head of this family, until I close my eyes for good. Then Grandpa turned to look at me, his voice warming. Garrett, you stay. You're not going anywhere. This is your home. And this is Meadow's home, too. Then he turned back to look straight into my dad's eyes and declared, his voice cold as steel, Monday, I'm calling Lawyer Morrison. Meadow will be added to the Hollister Family Trust. She'll be treated like every other great-grandchild of mine. My dad stood frozen, his face growing pale. Grandpa continued, every word clear, and her share will come from your inheritance, Boyd. Hearing that, my dad went completely pale and screamed, you can't do that. That's my inheritance. I'm your only son. Grandpa shook his head and replied, his voice calm but firm. That's my money. I earned it through 35 years of sweating on street patrol and 20 years of careful investing. I have every right to decide where it goes. He paused, looking at my dad with eyes both pained and determined. Maybe when you lose what you value most, you'll learn something. Family isn't measured by blood, Boyd. Family is measured by how we treat each other. My mom started crying, covering her face, her shoulders shaking. Tatum held Rosie tight, her eyes red and puffy as well. Sterling stood still as a statue, eyes looking down at the floor, clearly wanting to disappear from this room immediately. My dad stood there, mouth open but unable to speak. For the first time in my life, I saw him speechless. Then, Grandpa walked closer to Meadow once more, and what happened next made me unable to hold back my tears. Grandpa reached out and took Meadow's little hand. Delaney understood and gently set her down on the ground. He knelt to her eye level, his voice completely gentle as he spoke to her. Meadow, listen to Great-Grandpa. Meadow looked at him, eyes still wet, lips still trembling, hands still clutching Clover to her chest. Grandpa looked straight into her eyes and continued, each word slow and deliberate. You are my great-granddaughter. You are a Hollister, and no one, not a single person in this world, gets to say otherwise. Do you understand? Meadow looked at him, then turned to look at me like she was seeking permission. I nodded, my own tears about to spill over. She turned back to look at Grandpa, and for the first time all evening, she opened her mouth not because of fear, not because of confusion. Her voice trembling, barely a whisper. Great-Grandpa. Hearing that word, Grandpa Warren smiled, his eyes red and watery. He reached out and hugged Meadow close, whispering to his great-granddaughter. That's right, sweetheart. Great-Grandpa's here. Great-Grandpa will always be here. I stood there watching my grandpa hold my daughter, and for the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe. After a moment, Grandpa stood up and looked at me. He nodded toward the back door. Take your wife and daughter out to the back porch. Let her see the horses. Let me talk to your dad. I led Delaney and Meadow out to the back porch. The Colorado November night was cold, our breath turning to white clouds in the yellow porch light. Grandpa's 3 horses stood in the stable in the distance, one whinnying softly when it saw us come out. From inside the house, I could hear my parents' voices. I caught bits of Mom crying, Dad's voice getting louder, but I didn't care anymore. Meadow suddenly tugged on my hand and asked, her voice small but no longer shaking, Dad, will Great-Grandpa let me ride the horses? Hearing her ask that, I laughed, tears streaming down my face that I didn't bother wiping. I knelt to look at her. Of course, sweetheart, anytime you want. Great-Grandpa would love to teach you how to ride. Delaney came over and hugged both of us. She whispered in my ear, we're going to be okay. And for the first time all evening, I believed it. My family was here. Delaney, Meadow, and Grandpa. That was all I needed. That night, we stayed at the farm. Meadow lay between Delaney and me, still holding Clover, but for the first time since coming to us, she slept without startling awake. After Thanksgiving, my parents also returned to their house in Denver. But before they left, Grandpa had given them an ultimatum. If they continued not to accept Meadow, the house they were living in, the house Grandpa had bought for my dad when he first got married, would also be taken back. My dad walked away in silence, his face pale, but he still said not a single word of apology. My sister's family also went back the next morning. The moment we said goodbye, Tatum didn't say anything to me. Instead, she knelt and hugged Meadow, whispering loving words into her ear. I couldn't hear exactly what she said, but seeing Meadow's eyes light up, I knew those were the words she needed to hear. Rosie also ran over to hug her new cousin, the 2 kids holding each other for a long time before Tatum led her daughter away. Before leaving, my sister looked at me and nodded softly. Just that, but I understood. She was on my side. As for my parents and me, maybe after that night, there was nothing left. Even though he'd been stripped of most of his inheritance, my dad still stubbornly insisted my daughter didn't belong to the Hollister bloodline. But I didn't care anymore, because I love her like a father loves his own flesh and blood. Blood or not, that doesn't matter anymore. The moment we said goodbye to Grandpa to return to Denver, my daughter hugged Great-Grandpa tight and wouldn't let go. Before we left, he'd lifted her onto the horse's saddle, walking her around the stable. watching her smile, seeing how great-grandpa showed her every movement of holding the reins, every way to pat the horse, I knew Meadow had found a real family. After that day, Grandpa kept his promise. Meadow Hollister's name was added to the family trust. When he called to tell me the news, he said, "I believe she'll make me proud. I look into her eyes and see a strong child. She deserves to carry the Hollister name more than many people who share the same blood." A year has passed. Everything in my family has completely changed. My parents don't talk to us anymore. But honestly, I don't feel like we're missing anything. Their silence is more pleasant than their hurtful words. When I mentioned this to Grandpa over the phone, he smiled and replied, "Do you remember your dad said in a few months you'd come crawling back to apologize? You've made it a whole year. Let him know he was wrong. That's good enough." Our little family still lives happily every day. Still eating breakfast together before Meadow goes to school. Still reading books together every night before bed. And still going to Great-Grandpa's farm once a month so she can ride horses. That's what we need most. Because blood doesn't define family. Love defines family. That's the end of my story. If there's one thing I want to leave you with through this story, it's this. Never let anyone tell you what family is. Family is the people who are willing to stand up and protect you, whether they share your blood or not. Before I wrap up, I want to ask you, was I wrong to cut ties with my birth parents to protect my adopted daughter? If you were me, would you have done the same? And what do you think about my grandpa's actions when he cut his own biological son's inheritance? Please feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the following stories. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the following stories. What would you do if your dad gave your son a dollar store toy but handed your brother's kid a house? I watched it happen right in front of me. On Christmas night, my dad gave my son a plastic toy house. Seconds later, he turned around and handed his golden grandchild the deed to a $700,000 house, right in front of the whole family, calling it a gift for his only grandchild. For the first time in my life, I stood up and fought back, not for the money, but for my son. But the person who really flipped everything wasn't me. It was the 15-year-old who got the house, tearing my family apart in ways nobody saw coming. Before I begin this story, I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen. I wish you a peaceful Christmas season. Hello, everyone. I'm Colton, a 36-year-old civil engineer in Tucson, Arizona. This story happened Christmas night last year. But it started the day my younger brother was born, 33 years ago. Wade was born and I disappeared. Not literally, but in my dad Frank Davis's eyes, I became invisible. The phrase I heard most growing up was, "You're older, you need to share. Share my toys, share my room. Even give up the seat next to dad on family trips." Back then, I thought every older kid had to do that. The day I graduated with honors in engineering from the University of Arizona, Dad sat in the back, clapped a few times, then said one thing, "Good. Now go get a job." That night, I sat alone in my rental near Speedway, eating cold pizza and raising a beer to myself. 3 years later, Wade finished community college. Average grades, nothing special. But Dad rented a restaurant on Oracle Road, invited 50 people, stood up and told the crowd, "This is the pride of the Davis family." I stood in the corner, holding my beer, laughing along. What else could I do? Then Wade had a kid at 18. Jasper, the family's first grandchild, was born and instantly won Grandpa's heart. Micah, my son, was born 3 years after Jasper. But in Grandpa's eyes, the kid barely existed. Once at a family gathering, Dad asked me, "What's his name again?" I forgot. My son was standing right there, heard every word. But I kept telling myself things weren't that bad. Dad was just a little biased. He didn't hate anyone. Perhaps he wasn't skilled at expressing love to everyone. I told myself that for 36 years. Last year, Dad said he'd throw a special Christmas party at the house on Silverbell Road with an important gift for both grandkids. His voice was mysterious on the phone. I had no idea that'd be our family's last dinner. The 2-story house in suburban Tucson is where I was born. 4 bedrooms, a big yard, and the old oak tree out front which I used to climb every summer. On Christmas night, the house was decorated with twinkling lights around the porch and a pine wreath on the door. About 15 people showed up, family and a few close neighbors. The moment I walked into the living room, I noticed something so familiar it barely hurt anymore. Along the stairway wall, Jasper's pictures are everywhere. Jasper at 5 grinning next to Grandpa. Jasper is holding his high school soccer trophy. Jasper is standing in front of the Grand Canyon on a trip with Grandpa. As for Micah, I counted exactly 2 photos and both were group family shots. Harper, my wife, walked in behind me and squeezed my hand. She's a great furniture saleswoman. She can handle the most demanding customers with patience and a gentle smile. But every time we came to my dad's house, I saw that smile get a little more forced. In the corner of the living room, I spotted a face that rarely showed up at family gatherings. Darlene, my dad's sister, is sitting in the old armchair with a glass of wine, quietly watching everyone. Aunt Darlene was 58, lived alone in Phoenix, and her relationship with my dad had been cold for years for reasons nobody knew. When she saw me, she nodded hello and gave a slight smile, but didn't say anything. Her being there surprised me a bit, but I didn't think much of it. Dinner went by in the usual warm atmosphere. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and the pumpkin pie Mrs. Patterson brought over from next door. Laughter and chatter filled the air, with the scent of cinnamon and pine drifting through. What really made me happy was seeing Micah and Jasper sitting next to each other at the end of the table. Despite being 3 years apart, the 2 kids were close like real brothers. Jasper was excitedly telling Micah about the Orion constellation, while Micah broke his chocolate bar in half and gave 1 piece to his cousin. They discussed telescopes, Mars, and the possibility of people living on the moon. Watching the 2 kids having fun together like that, I thought the next generation would be different. Perhaps they wouldn't carry the wounds of the adults. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room for coffee and to wait for gift time. The mood was still cheerful when my dad stood up and tapped his spoon lightly against his wine glass to get everyone's attention. And that's when everything began to fall apart. He held 2 gifts in his hands. A small box wrapped in red paper and a thick white envelope. He cleared his throat, then called out loud, "Micah, come up here with me." My son walked up, his eyes lighting up with surprise. This was the first time in years that Grandpa called his name first. I saw Harper sit up straighter, her eyes sparkling with a bit of hope, too. Dad handed the small box to Micah, his voice casual. "Here's your gift." My son carefully unwrapped the paper, then opened the lid. Inside was a plastic toy house, the kind they sell at Dollar Tree for about $3 or $4. Micah looked at the gift for a second, then looked up, forced a bright smile and said, "Thank you." Right then, Brooke, Wade's wife, covered her mouth and giggled. She leaned over to her husband, whispering but loud enough for me to hear, "How cute. A toy for kindergartners." I gripped the armrest, trying to stay calm. Then Dad called out next, his voice suddenly much more serious. "Jasper, come here." Jasper walked up and took the white envelope from Grandpa's hand. The boy opened it and scanned through the papers inside. His face changed color. He looked up at Grandpa and asked, his voice shaking, "This is—" Before Jasper could finish his sentence, my dad was already smiling with satisfaction, turned to face the whole room, and announced, "This house, I'm leaving it to my only grandchild. When Jasper turns 18, it'll officially belong to you. My only grandchild." The whole room went silent when they heard those words. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor sitting by the window, quietly set down her coffee cup, her eyes wide, as she looked at Micah, then back at me. Mr. Thompson, the neighbor who came over for beers with my dad every Saturday afternoon, cleared his throat awkwardly, his eyes staring at the floor like he was trying to find a place to hide. The air in the room got so thick I could hear the wood crackling in the fireplace. A few relatives whispered to each other. I caught bits of someone saying, "This house has got to be worth 700 grand at least." Someone else replied, "Frank's really generous." Wade and Brooke exchanged satisfied looks, as if they had just hit the lottery. My dad was still smiling, his face glowing as he'd just done something great. And me? I looked over at Micah. My son was still standing there, holding the plastic toy, the smile on his face fading out like a candle getting blown out. The kid didn't cry, didn't say anything. He just looked down at the cheap toy house in his hands, then quietly went back to his seat. Harper gripped my hand under the table, her nails almost cutting into my skin. But she didn't say anything. She was waiting for me. The words "only grandchild" cut through my chest like a knife. I knew I couldn't just sit there. In the tense silence, across from me was Brooks giggling, Wade patting his son's shoulder, congratulating him, and Dad looking at Jasper like he was the only person in the universe. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Jasper. The boy stood still with the papers in his hands, but instead of being happy, his eyes kept glancing over at Micah. That look was like a kid who just got given something way too expensive and suddenly realized the friend next to him had nothing. Jasper even took a step toward his cousin, like he wanted to say something, but then stopped. And Micah was sitting curled up in the corner of the sofa, head down, both hands clutching the plastic model. The kid was trying to make himself as small as possible, like he wanted to disappear from this room. Seeing my son like that, my chest tightened, and before I could think, I stood up. Dad raised his eyebrows, looking at me, half surprised, half annoyed. Around us, the relatives' whispers died down. Everyone was waiting to see what I was going to do. I took a breath, then looked straight at Dad and said, "I don't have any opinion about the house. You want to give it to whoever, that's your right." Hearing that, Dad nodded, his shoulders relaxing a bit like he'd just dropped a heavy load. He thought I was about to sit back down, like always. But this time was different. I swallowed hard, my heart still racing, then continued. "But you just said Jasper is your only grandchild. Micah's sitting right here." He heard everything. The smile on his face went out. He crossed his arms, lifted his chin toward me, and replied, his voice casual, "I care more about whoever's closer to me. Jasper's here all the time. How many times a year do I even see Micah?" That answer made me choke up. I wanted to scream that it was because he never invited us, never called to check in. But before I could open my mouth, Wade jumped in. My brother stepped forward, patted Dad's shoulder, then turned to look at me, his voice full of sarcasm. "Come on, Colton. You're always jealous. Aren't you tired?" That was like throwing a match into a gas tank. I turned to look straight at Wade's face and replied, each word clear, "You're right. I am jealous." Wade blinked. Brooks' mouth dropped open. Even Dad paused for a beat. Clearly, nobody expected me to admit that. But I wasn't done yet. My voice got lower as I continued. "I'm jealous because Dad actually sees you. And me? I'm like air in this room. Here or not here, nobody notices." Wade opened his mouth to fight back, but then closed it again. For the first time in my life, I saw my brother speechless. Wade's silence gave me the courage to speak. I turned back to look at Dad, my voice shaking but still clear. "I can accept you treating me differently. 30-something years, I'm used to it. But Micah's different. He's just a 12-year-old kid. He doesn't deserve to be treated like that." Dad stood in the middle of the living room, face stone cold, his eyes looking through me like I was some stranger who just barged into his house to cause trouble. The air in the room got thick. Mr. Thompson, the neighbor, quietly stood up, as if he wanted to go outside and avoid the storm. A few relatives looked at each other, not knowing what to do. In that suffocating atmosphere, Brooke suddenly turned to look at Harper and spoke up, her mouth wearing a smile but her eyes sharp as knives. "Harper, I think you should tell Colton to be more realistic. Life isn't always fair. What's the point of demanding all the time?" I saw Harper's shoulders stiffen. She slowly stood up, eyes looking straight at Brooke, and replied, her voice so calm it made even me shiver. "You're right, life isn't fair. But let me ask you this. If one day someone looked your son in the face and said he didn't deserve to be loved as much as another kid, could you sit there?" Brooke went pale. Her lips moved for a few seconds, then went silent, her eyes desperately looking at Wade for help. But Wade was busy staring at the floor. The atmosphere was tense like a guitar string about to snap. My dad stepped forward, face red with anger, slammed his hand on the sofa armrest, and yelled, "Enough! Colton, what do you want? I give you the house and you'll be happy. Is that it?" I shook my head and replied to Dad, my voice tired, "I don't need the house. Please acknowledge that Micah is also your grandchild. That's it. How hard is that?" After hearing that, he laughed bitterly and said, his voice ice cold, "Who I care about is my business. You don't like it, there's the door. That sentence was like a door slamming shut in my face. I nodded, grabbed Harper's hand, and said to her, "Let's go." I turned to look for Micah, about to tell my son to get up. But right then, a figure in the corner of the room stirred slightly. Aunt Darlene, who had been sitting silent like a statue in the armchair all evening, was slowly standing up. Her face was calm, but her eyes were a different story. Something was burning quietly in them, something I'd never seen in her before. The whole room turned to look at her. My dad frowned, clearly not understanding what his sister was about to do. With everyone's attention on her, Darlene looked straight into my dad's eyes and spoke, her voice slightly shaking but each word clear. "Frank, you're doing exactly what Dad did to me." I stood there, not understanding what she was talking about. My dad stared wide-eyed, stepped forward, pointed his finger at his sister's face, and said through gritted teeth, "Darlene, why are you butting in? This is between my son and me." Faced with the harsh reaction, Darlene still stood firm, eyes looking straight at her brother, and replied, "It is my business because I've witnessed this before. 40 years ago, and I've been silent too long." My dad froze when she finished speaking. Around us, relatives and neighbors looked at each other, none of them understanding what was happening. Darlene took a deep breath, her eyes looking distant like she was reopening an old wound, then turned to my dad and began. "Back then, Dad sent you to college in Tucson. But I had to stay home and help Mom work the fields because Dad said there's no point in girls getting educated." My dad waved his hand dismissively, voice irritated. "That's ancient history, why bring it up?" But Darlene ignored him, continued her story, voice getting lower. "When Dad died, he left this house to you. I only got a few $100. That's it." Wade sighed quietly, shaking his head as if she were wasting everyone's time. Darlene didn't notice. She looked straight at my dad and asked, her voice choking up, "Do you know how that felt? Having your own parents tell you that you weren't worth it?" My dad opened his mouth to respond, but Darlene raised her hand to stop him. She took another breath, then continued, "I stayed silent for 40 years, because back then, people said girls shouldn't ask for things. Because I was scared of losing you, losing family. I convinced myself Dad had his reasons." At this point, she turned to look at Micah. The kid was still sitting curled up in the corner of the sofa with the plastic model in his hands. When she saw her nephew, Darlene's voice suddenly trembled. "But tonight, when I saw that boy, I saw myself from 40 years ago. Same look in his eyes. Same pain." She turned back to face my dad, eyes glistening but voice still clear. "You're doing to Micah exactly what Dad did to me, and I can't sit by and watch anymore." At that moment, my dad's face turned a deep shade of purple. He stepped closer, pointed straight at his sister's face, and yelled, "Darlene, shut up. You have no right to interfere in my family's affairs. 40 years ago was different. This is different." Hearing Dad yell, Wade immediately sided with him, turned to look at Darlene, and said, voice annoyed, "Darlene, you're going too far. This is between my dad and his grandkids. Don't drag up old stuff." Not stopping there, Brooke also jumped in, tilted her head, looked at Darlene, and dropped this line. "You've lived alone your whole life, no family. What do you know about raising kids?" My sister-in-law's words were like a knife to the heart. I saw Darlene blink, her jaw clenched tight, but instead of backing down, she looked straight at Brooke and replied, voice calm but each word sharp as a blade, "I don't have a family because I never had the chance. Because all the money, opportunities, and everything in this family went to my brother, while I had to scrape by starting from nothing." Brooke went pale, her mouth moving but no words coming out. At this point, my dad stepped right up to Darlene, eyes bulging, and roared, "Darlene, I told you to shut up." But Darlene still stood there, back straight, eyes looking directly at her brother, and replied, her voice echoing throughout the room, "You've kept me quiet for 40 years. Frank, today I'm gonna speak." The room exploded. My dad was screaming. Wade was arguing back. Brooke was criticizing. Harper stood next to me, hand gripping mine tight. Everyone talking at once, voices overlapping, nobody listening to anybody. In the middle of all that chaos, I suddenly realized something. Where was Jasper? I looked around and saw him standing still on the other side of the living room, still holding the stack of house papers. His face was white as a sheet, eyes watching the chaos in front of him. Then he walked over to the coffee table and slammed the papers down on its surface. That sharp sound made all of us go dead silent in an instant. Jasper stood in the middle of the living room, the stack of house papers lying on the coffee table where he'd just slammed them down. 15 years old, almost as tall as Wade, and for the first time, I saw his eyes weren't a spoiled kid's eyes anymore. The whole room froze. Nobody dared breathe hard. In that silence, Jasper looked straight at his grandfather and spoke, voice shaking but firm. "I'm not taking this house." My dad blinked several times like he couldn't believe his ears, then stammered, looking at his grandson. What did you say?" Jasper still stood there, eyes not leaving his grandfather, repeating each word. "I'm not taking it. I don't want this house." That sentence was like a bomb thrown into the middle of the room. I saw Wade standing frozen, mouth hanging open. A few relatives whispered to each other, and my dad stood there like someone just punched him in the gut. Brooke was the first to react. She rushed over, grabbed her son's shoulders, voice panicked. "Jasper, are you crazy? That's a whole fortune." Jasper turned to look at his mom, gently removed her hands, and replied, voice strangely calm, "I know, and I know what the real price of it is, too." At that moment, Brooke stepped back, eyes blinking rapidly like she didn't recognize her own child. The air in the room got thick enough to choke on. Jasper turned back to face his grandfather, each word clear. "You just gave Micah a few dollar plastic model, then gave me a $700,000 house." Right in front of him. Did you see Micah's face when that happened? Hearing the boy's question, my dad swallowed hard, his eyes glancing toward Micah, then back to Jasper, voice stammering. But you're my grandson." Jasper stepped forward, his voice suddenly ringing out so loud it made even people standing in the corner jump. "Micah is your grandson too. We're both your real grandchildren. Why do you treat him like he doesn't exist?" My dad stood there, unable to answer the question. For the first time in his life, I saw him cornered with no way out. But Jasper wasn't done yet. He pointed toward Darlene and continued, "Aunt Darlene was right about everything. You're doing exactly what your dad did to her 40 years ago." Darlene stood there, tears rolling down her cheeks, nodding slightly like confirming her nephew's words. Jasper shook his head, voice bitter. "If I take this house, I become part of that cycle. I don't want that." The silence stretched a few more seconds. Then Wade snapped awake. My brother's face turned red with anger. He stepped forward, pointing straight at his son's face, and roared, "Jasper, shut your mouth right now. You're destroying our whole family's future. You know that?" Jasper turned to look at Wade. His eyes were so cold that it made me shiver. He replied, voice not shaking at all, "Our whole family's future? Or Mom and Dad's future?" Wade froze, but Jasper wasn't finished. He continued, voice trembling with emotion, "Do you two ever actually care about me? Or am I just an excuse for you to get this house?" That question was like a slap across Wade's face. I saw my brother go pale, jaw clenched tight, then his hand raised like he was about to swing down at his son's face. I lunged forward, grabbed Wade's wrist, and yelled in my brother's face, "Wade, what are you doing?" Wade yanked his hand away, eyes wild, looking at me then at Jasper. The whole room held its breath. Jasper stepped back, looking at Wade with an expression I'll never forget. Not fear, not anger, but disappointment. The deep disappointment of a child who just saw his father's true face. He spoke, voice shaking but still clear. "See, I tell the truth and you want to hurt me. That's how you solve everything." Wade stood frozen, hands still raised halfway, face twisted. Brooke sobbed next to her husband but didn't dare say anything. Finally, Jasper looked around the room once, from his grandfather to his parents, to the relatives standing silent like statues. Then he spoke, voice choking, "I don't want to be part of this family anymore." That sentence was like a knife cutting the last thread. I saw my dad step back, his hand gripping the sofa armrest like he was about to fall. Wade stood there, face pale green, no longer aggressive like a few minutes before. Brooke was the first to react. She burst into sobs, rushed over, and grabbed her son's hand. "Jasper, you can't say that." But Jasper gently removed his mother's hand and said nothing. He turned to look toward the corner of the sofa, where Micah was still sitting curled up with the plastic model in his hands. He walked over and sat down at eye level with his cousin. His voice softened, utterly different from the sharp coldness just before. "Micah, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." Micah looked up at his cousin, eyes red-rimmed. The kid didn't say anything, just nodded slightly. The two kids looked at each other for a few seconds, an understanding that needed no words. Finally, Jasper stood up. He looked around the room one last time, then turned his back and walked toward the door. The door slammed shut. Outside, the sound of a car engine starting echoed from the driveway, then faded into the night. I stood there, looking at the closed door, and realized something bitter. A 15-year-old kid just did what none of us adults in this room dared to do. He turned down $700,000. He spoke truth to everyone's face. And he walked away. And we, the adults in this room, could only stand and watch. Christmas night ended in a heavy atmosphere. When Jasper left, the relatives and neighbors also hurried home. I took Micah's hand and walked out the door, Harper right beside us. Behind us, Brooke's voice rang out shrilly. "There. Are you happy now? This is all because of you too. My son's leaving is because of you." I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say to her. Maybe Brooke would never understand how big the pain gets when a child is denied and rejected like that. All she saw was $700,000 slipping through her fingers. And my dad just sat there on the sofa, head hanging down, not saying a word. On the drive home, I drove in silence. Harper sat in the back with Micah, holding him the whole long ride. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the kid resting his head on his mom's shoulder, eyes looking out through the dark window. When we got home, Micah went straight upstairs to his room without saying a word. Harper watched him go, then turned to me, voice gentle. "I'm sleeping with Micah tonight. You get some rest." I nodded, watching my wife go upstairs. The house suddenly felt unusually empty. Around 2 in the morning, I still couldn't sleep. After tossing and turning for a while, I got up to go to the kitchen to get some water. Harper was sitting at the dining table, alone, next to a nearly empty wine glass. I pulled up a chair next to my wife, reached for the wine glass and drained it, then asked quietly, "How's Micah?" Harper sighed and replied, voice tired, "He just fell asleep. Cried for a while before he'd close his eyes." I was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you okay?" Harper looked at me, her eyes both gentle and worried. "I'm okay, but I'm worried about Micah, and you too." I blinked, not understanding what my wife was saying. Harper reached out and took my hand, continued, voice getting lower. "You've put up with this too long. You need to talk to yourself too, Colton. Micah wasn't the only one who got hurt tonight." I didn't answer because she was right. The next morning, I knocked on Micah's door. The kid was sitting on his bed, holding the plastic house model, staring at it. I sat down next to my son and said, "Don't blame yourself. Grandpa's the one who did wrong here." Micah nodded slightly and whispered, "I know, Dad. Jasper said that too." I looked at my son, heart clenching. "Jasper's a good person. He stood up for you." Micah was quiet for a while. Then the kid looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed, and asked a question that made my heart feel like someone was squeezing it. "Dad, why doesn't Grandpa love me?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "It's not that he doesn't love you. He doesn't know how to love right. That's his fault, not yours. You understand?" Micah looked at me, lips moving slightly. I pulled my son into my arms and continued, voice choking up. "I will never let anyone say you're not worth it. Never." Micah cried. For the first time since the party, the kid really cried, sobbing in my arms, like letting out everything he'd been holding in all night. I held my son tight, and I cried too. In the days that followed, Harper suggested getting Micah to see a therapist. We spent more time with our son, talked more, listened more. One evening, Harper sat down next to Micah and said to him, voice gentle, "Love isn't measured by money. It isn't measured by houses. Love is measured by who's there when you need them. And Mom and Dad will always be here." Micah nodded, showing his first small smile since Christmas night. But then the kid turned to look at Harper and asked, voice worried, "Mom, is Jasper okay?" We looked at each other, unsure of how to respond, because we were wondering the same thing. I tried calling Jasper many times, but his phone was always off. Nobody knew where he was, if he was safe. and that worried me just as much as Micah's situation. The other side of the family was completely different. I didn't reach out to anyone, but my phone wouldn't stop ringing. The first day, Wade called to curse me out. My brother blamed everything on me, voice growling through the phone. "This is all your fault. My son's leaving is your fault. Are you happy now?" The second day, Brooke called. She cursed, then cried, then cursed again. I stopped answering. The third day, Wade called again. This time, no more cursing, just crying. My brother cried through the phone, voice choking. "Jasper still hasn't come home. I don't know what to do." I didn't know what to say, because I didn't know where Jasper was either. Darlene was different. She called me just once, voice calm but firm. "I'm not contacting Frank anymore. A lifetime of silence is enough. I wish you and your family good health." Then she hung up, and since then, I haven't heard from her. My family, the family I tried to hold together for so many years, was now completely broken. A week after Christmas night, I was really worried about Jasper. Every day, I called his number, but I only got that long, hopeless beep. On the other side, my brother's family stopped blaming. Perhaps Jasper's departure made Wade and Brooke realize that blaming wouldn't bring their son back. The cursing had turned to crying. The anger had given way to fear. Police were contacted. A missing person report was filed. Security cameras caught Jasper's car turning onto the road leading to the Coronado National Forest, east of Tucson, then disappearing from view. The vehicle was found abandoned on the side of the road, but Jasper had vanished into thin air. My dad came to my house one afternoon in early January. When I opened the door, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. Gone was the pride of someone who always thought he was right. Before me stood an older man with a hunched back and eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked at me, then at Harper and Micah standing behind, voice trembling as he apologized to all of us. He said he was wrong about me, about Micah, about Jasper, about Darlene. I nodded slightly and just replied, "I heard you." That was it. I didn't hug him, didn't say I forgave him, because for me, everything had ended after that Christmas night. After leaving our house, Dad hit the road looking for Jasper. He drove through small towns, posted missing person flyers and asked everyone he met. But nobody had seen the boy. 3 months later, Wade and Brooke filed for divorce. They blamed each other for Jasper leaving, arguing over who had been too greedy and who hadn't cared enough about their son. 6 months later, Jasper's search file was officially closed. We met at the police station. Wade, Brooke, my dad, Harper, and me. Nobody said anything. Brooke sobbed uncontrollably. Wade stood like a lost soul. My dad collapsed into a chair. We cried, not because of the house, but because of the departure of a 15-year-old who had left a bitter lesson for the whole family. And today, another Christmas is here. My son is 13 now. The kid's taller, more mature, but still keeps the plastic house model on his bookshelf. Inside the small box next to it are letters Micah has written to Jasper over the past year. The kid told me that when Jasper comes back, he'll give them all to his cousin. A week ago, my dad came by again. He looked much older, with his hair almost completely gray and his back more hunched. He brought a Christmas gift for Micah. When he offered the gift, Micah looked at him for a long time, then shook his head and said to his grandfather, "I forgive you, but I'm not taking it. When Jasper comes home, we'll open presents together." My dad stood frozen. His eyes got red. Then he nodded and turned away. Watching my dad's hunched figure disappear behind the door, I suddenly thought that maybe forgiveness is something kids can do more easily than adults. Micah forgave his grandfather, but he didn't forget. As for me, I'm not sure if I can forgive. Jasper, that tall boy with curly blonde hair, is still missing. His phone's still off. Not a single text, not a single call. But we keep waiting. Wade's not in Tucson anymore. After the police closed the file, my brother sold everything, quit his job, and then drove across America in search of his son. Every week, he posts a new photo online, standing at bus stations, train stations, and in small towns far away, holding Jasper's picture with the words, "Have you seen my son?" I don't forgive the things Wade said that Christmas night, but every time I see my brother wandering everywhere with fragile hope each day, my heart can't hate him. After all, he's just a father looking for his child. Now, every time I look at Micah, I still hope for a miracle. When I was little, I used to write letters to Santa, asking for everything I could think of. Growing up, I stopped believing in those things. Life has taught me that there are no miracles, only the consequences of the choices we create for ourselves. But this year, I'm writing to Santa again, not for myself, but for Jasper. I'm only asking for one thing: bring the boy home. We don't need money. We need to know he's safe, because money can be earned back. But once a child walks away, you never know when they'll return. My story ends here. Before I stop, I want to ask you, was I wrong to stand up that night? If I had stayed silent like always, would Jasper have left? And if you were Jasper, would you have done the same? Please leave a comment and share your thoughts. If the story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening. I wish you a peaceful Christmas. And remember, never let money or favoritism destroy what matters most. I look forward to seeing you in the following stories.